Today is March 1st, 2024. We are interviewing Henry Robinson. My name is Esther Finder. We are in Henderson, Nevada in the United States, and the language will be English. Thank you for speaking with us today. How are you feeling today, sir?
Very good, thank you.
What is your name, and can you please spell it?
It's Henry Albert Robinson, Henry Albert Robinson. My nickname is Robbie, Robby.
Where were you born?
I was born in Compton, California in 1925.
And how old are you today?
Today I'm about 98, give or take.
And what was your father's name?
Henry Albert Robinson.
And where was he born?
He was born in London, England.
What work did he do?
He was a electrical contractor.
Do you know when he came to the United States and why?
Yeah, he came to the United States in 1906, along with his dad and a couple of uncles, all Robinsons. They're in Canada.
What was your mother's name?
Mabel Claire Bizzo, Bezzo. Some people pronounce it Bizzo.
What work did she do?
She was a waitress for the Harvey House, which is a restaurant on the Santa Fe Railroad, when my dad met her. And they got married and ultimately ended up in Compton, California.
Can you tell us about the Compton of your childhood?
Well, the Compton of my childhood was a very quiet, nice little town. There were no fast food places. You could ride your bike all over town and nobody bothered you. It was just a really nice, quiet little place to grow up. Easy access to the Pacific Electric, so you could get a quarter, take a quarter, and go to the beach and spend the day. And you got nickel down, a nickel back, and 15 cents for a hamburger and a Coke.
When you were a kid growing up, did you have any Jewish friends?
Not that I can remember. We did have some friends, their name was Ogle, and I'm not sure, maybe they were Jewish, but I'm not sure. But they're a very lovely family.
What religious traditions did your family observe?
Well, of course, my mother's dad was an Episcopalian Methodist, so, we celebrated Christmas and New Year's and Easter and birthdays and other holidays. And much like everybody does today.
What did you do for fun when you were a kid?
Well, when we played a lot of ball games. In other words, throw the ball over the roof and yell at whoever's supposed to catch it. Played tag and hide and seek and that kind of thing. A lot of fun little things. Always out in the street or in the yard or like that.
Did your family have a strong military tradition?
We didn't even know anything much about the military. My dad wasn't involved in the military. And during World War I, they sent him a note from England and conscripted him and demanded that he show up. So he sent a note back saying, send me a ticket on the boat. They didn't. That was the end of that. And besides that, he was already working on a railroad.
I realize you were just a teenager at the time, but were you aware at all of what was going on in Germany under Hitler before the war?
Not really. We didn't pay too much attention. We knew the Japanese were pretty aggressive in fighting in China, and we were kind of following that, but we hadn't thought much about what was going on in Germany until they invaded Poland. And then, of course, that's about the time that World War II broke out.
Do you remember hearing about the invasion of Poland?
Yeah, I remember that, and I remember the Stuka dive bombers bombing civilians in Poland, and we were absolutely flabbergasted that they would do something like that. They hadn't done anything to anybody, and all of a sudden there's these planes diving in Krakow or whatever. Ridiculous.
Did you read about that, or did you see it in newsreels?
We didn't, well, we maybe saw a little of it in newsreel. Newsreels were very short. A little bit in the paper, and my dad took Time magazine, and occasionally we would, get a little something about that in Time magazine. I read a little bit about that in that magazine.
Did you and your friends talk about what was going on in Europe or what was going on with Japan before the war? Were you at all concerned?
Well, no. You want to realize that 13, 14, 15 years old, you're a teenager, you were involved in yourself and your other kids, That was the central thing. You didn't pay much attention to anything that had to do with the world.
Things changed with Pearl Harbor. Can you tell me how they impacted you?
Well, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, I remember Roosevelt announcing that, and at that particular time, being 16 years old, I realized there was a very good chance that I would probably end up in the military.
What was going on in your life from age 16 with Pearl Harbor until you went into the military?
Well, actually, that particular time when I was 16, I was working in Tulare, California at my uncle's chicken ranch. We had 10,000 laying hens and hatched 2,000 baby chicks a week. So we were involved in farm, that kind of thing, and didn't pay much attention to the war or anything because that was way over there in Europe somewhere. So we didn't really think about it. And when they bombed Pearl Harbor, then we realized that, of course, we're going to be involved in that particular thing. And I continued to work in the chicken ranch because I was exempt, being in the farm business. And I registered for the draft, and I realized that I'm going to miss out on all the fun. So I came back to Los Angeles and got a job in a factory that manufactured transformers. And the funny thing about it is I'd had that kind of schooling, and the guy hired me to clean these offices. Then he realized, here I am, 17 years old, I know all about transformers. So he made me foreman over about 20 old ladies that must have been at least 30. And here I am helping them with the transformer business, and they gave me a raise, so I was making 50, 60 cents an hour, which was a whole lot of money.
How did you get involved with the military?
Well, I realized that, of course, registering for the draft, and I thought, if I get drafted, there's a good chance that they're going to send me to the Pacific, and I didn't want to go. So I got to thinking about it, and I went down and actually enlisted so that I'd make sure that I went into the Army. So I didn't want to be in the Navy, because if the ship went down, you're in the water. And if you're on dry land, at least you got a chance. So as soon as I enlisted, they put me on a train, sent me to Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is the Armored Training Center. And I ended up training and joining the 11th Armored Division in Fort Knox, Kentucky. I know there's other information that's erroneous about that, but I was assigned to the 11th Armored in Fort Knox and trained for Patton and that particular thing for the European campaign.
Can you tell me a little bit about your training and what they were preparing you for?
Well, they because of my memory, and I don't have exactly a photographic memory, but some way I have a pretty good memory. And they didn't have drones, so they trained me in reconnaissance to go out and observe and then come back and show them on the map or something about what we supposedly saw. And that was essentially what reconnaissance was about, to go out and observe and come back and report.
Where were the members of your unit from?
I'm sorry?
Where were the members of your unit? Where were your fellow soldiers from?
Oh, most of them are from the East. Some were from the Nordic, like Michigan and what's some of the other, South Dakota, North Dakota. They were of Norwegian or Swedish or Danish. And we used to kid them because they had a little bit of an accent that was different than California, which we figured spoke the best English. And so we'd kid them a little bit about some of that. And then the rest of the guys are from New York, New Jersey, and that particular thing. There were only two of us that were from California.
Were there any Jews or any African Americans in your unit?
I'm sure there were, but we didn't identify anybody by specific religion or anything like that. That was not even thought about. You were a military and your rank, and that was about it.
And what was your rank?
Well, I was a private for quite a while. When I made PFC, nobody told me for a long time, and then I got a check, and I looked at it, and I couldn't believe the difference in pay. And I had been advanced, and nobody informed me at all.
When did you get shipped out?
I got shipped out, oh, goodness, let's see. Sometime in 1946, I think.
When were you sent to Europe?
I was sent to Europe on the HMS Samaria, a British cargo ship, and we sailed around the North Atlantic while they put together a convoy, and then finally sailed to Europe. And during that particular time, they fed us stewed apricots and watery oatmeal 3 meals a day. We didn't know that they had all kinds of American food in their hold, but they were taking that back to England so they could sell it. So they were robbing the Americans while they were transporting them to fight for their country.
And when did you get sent to England?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to backtrack and think about it. Pearl Harbor was what, 41? So it was probably 43 or 44, probably 44. I have records, but at any rate, somewhere along in there. I think I was over in Europe about 3.5 years.
How long were you in England?
Well, we were in Liverpool and then Southampton for probably 6 months. And then all of a sudden, while they packed everybody up and rushed us across the Mediterranean there, or not Mediterranean, but the sea between England and Europe, because the Battle of the Bulge has just broken out, had just started. And then we rushed across France and right directly into the Battle of Belgium there, the Battle of Bastogne.
What can you tell us about your experience with combat?
Well, of course, I was a reconnaissance. So you don't shoot unless you get shot at, and even then, if you can get out of it, your information is more important than causing a battle. So, you know, you can defend yourself, but if you're out there to get information and bring it back. And that was the important thing. So that's essentially what we did. We were in a few firefights, but we weren't there to start a war.
Did your unit take any prisoners?
Yeah. In fact, I personally captured 2 Germans with a cup of coffee. And that was because we were in a kitchen truck making donuts for the boys so that the Red Cross could distribute the donuts that we made, and then they got credit for it. And during that episode, we had somebody rap on the tailgate, so we went out and saw a couple of images, couldn't tell what they were, and had them come up into the light in the truck. And when we got them inside the kitchen area where we could see them, they were a couple of young, scared, hungry German soldiers. So we gave them a cup of coffee and a donut or two, and then they put their hands up, said "comrade," which is telling us that they wanted to surrender. So then we took them, I got down from the truck and took them over to the commanding officer, and they asked permission to come in and see him, and we walked in with them, and he called the corporal of the guard and said, "These 2 Germans want to surrender, and take them back and put them in the compound. We want you to stay here." He said, "You I want to see." So I waited until they were taken, and then he said, "It's fine that you captured a couple of German soldiers, or they surrendered to you. And the next time that happens, be sure and take their rifles."
Good point. Did you have much contact with the local civilians?
Well, occasionally we would ask them, directions, or, they were curious, because here you are, American soldiers, and they were curious about it. First place, you were American, and here you are over there defending their country. So they would always be very courteous and gratified that we were there. And they would thank us in their particular language. And sometimes they would give us a little something to eat. And we also would give them, we had 10-in-1 rations, which is essentially feed 10 men for 1 meal or 1 man for 10 meals. And we would share that with some of the Europeans, because we had also, in a lot of instances, stopped and they set up the kitchen truck and we'd serve hot meals to the soldiers and all. Even if they were near or on the front lines, they would relieve them, bring them back and feed them, and then put them back out there. And so that was a rotation thing that went on. And because of that, well, the Europeans realized we were eating pretty good, and we would share some of that food with them. And even our rations were superior to the food that they had.
Did you ever have the occasion to hear some of the Nazi propaganda that was being directed at the Americans, like Axis Sally or Lord Haw Haw?
They dropped leaflets and things like that to the Germans, and we didn't really pay too much attention to their propaganda or any of that thing. We knew that they were trying to exterminate or incarcerate the Jewish people, but they also did it to the Polish people and the French people and whoever they could get across. They would conscript them, put them in a concentration camp so they would work in their factories. So that was involved all the time. And one of the incidences, we were in one little town, and we finally secured the town. And as we were going through, we saw this big sign outside of this factory. You know what it said? Ford. So the Germans were making American Ford trucks for the German army, and Ford was reaping the benefit.
You mentioned concentration camps. Did you know about the extermination camps?
Only after the war was over. And that was tremendous. Thank God I didn't ever get to Auschwitz. But I did get to a couple of the other concentration camps, Dachau and Breslau, and they were internment camps that had not only French or whatever, other people, Italians or whoever they could conscript to work in their factories. And if they could and recognize, they'd exterminate or at least isolate the Jewish people. And we never figured out what Hitler had against the Jewish people. What'd they ever do to him?
Before you got to Dachau, Dachau was the first camp that you saw?
Breslau?
Breslau was the first one?
Yeah.
Before you got to the camps, were you prepared in any way for what you might find there?
Of course not. No, we just showed up, and here's this great big compound with all these houses or buildings, and we realized that there were hundreds and hundreds of people in there. Essentially, they were prisoners. And we just opened the gates. Our instructions were they may be starving, so please do not feed them. You can give them candy and cigarettes, but before we have to check them out medically to make sure that they were well enough to eat food. And they were emaciated somewhat, but they weren't that bad, you know. And so they were released immediately to go home if they could get there, or at least stay in camp until they could get a group together to go to wherever country they were from. And then I had the experience of escorting a lot of those people back to their country, which was an education in learning a little bit about their language and a little bit about their customs, and then getting to that country and seeing some of that, and then come back and pick up another group and take them. It was a fascinating thing. I did that for a year after the shooting stopped.
The people that you took back to their native country, were they nationals? Were they Jewish prisoners? Was there a mix? Who was in this group that you would, when you would take a group?
They were essentially people that lived in that particular thing. We didn't have much of anything to think about as far as nationalities. Where are you from? Poland? Where are you from? Hungary? Where are you from? Czechoslovakia or Slovak? You know, and so where do you live? Krakow or, you know, wherever. And so they were just people. We you know, escort them back to their home or to that particular area, and then let them go, and they could find their way back to where apparently they were from.
Could you share with us, please, what it was like when you approached one of these camps, whether it was Breslau or Dachau?
Well,
what was the perimeter like? What were you able to see?
We saw a huge compound that was like a fort. The only thing is that it was just barracks and fence, high fence all the way around it. And we opened the gates and let people out, and they kind of milled around because they didn't have the transportation to go back to wherever they were from. And so they finally organized them into groups, and then I was assigned to help take them back to wherever they were from.
Did you go inside any of these camps?
Well, not actually. Well, yeah, in a way, a couple times we could, but they were just barracks, and it was just like any kind of a compound, much like what I was in as a soldier. You know, it was just houses or barracks and place to eat, you know, that kind of stuff. And they were conscripted, in other words, they were transported by truck to a particular point in where they were supposed to be working, whatever it was that they were doing. They may be farming, or it may be in manufacturing or something, but they were, you know, depending on, I guess, what skills they had, I don't know.
Did you have any sense of the health of these prisoners, or if there was disease inside the camp, anything like that?
No, we were told not to feed them. And they seemed to be in pretty good shape, you know. They weren't really decimated and all like some people would think. They weren't robust, but they weren't starved either. So, you know, it looks like they had at least enough food to survive on, and they seemed to be in fairly good health.
What about dead bodies? Were there any that you could see?
No, not really.
What about the camp personnel? Were you able to see any of the guards?
Usually when we got to concentration camp, the Germans were already gone. They packed up and left a day or two beforehand. You know, they realized they were not going to be caught at that particular camp. And I understand that because they probably would have been shot. And so they, you know, evacuated as quickly as they could and as far away as possible. And then, of course, if they were involved in anything, they would deny anything. So we never knew who was in charge or anything like that.
You just made a comment about they would have been shot or whatever. Were you aware of any acts of revenge by the inmates inside the camp?
I don't think so. They didn't have any weapons, and I think that it seemed to me that the people that were in charge left, and they were gone. I mean, they were in another county or wherever, and the camp was totally devoid of any German or prisoner keepers or whatever you want to call them.
In the camps that you encountered during the war, were there any Allied POWs in the camps that you saw?
I understand later that there were, but we didn't know at the time. All we know is that we're just hundreds of people that had been in one of these particular units, and I guess we understood that apparently some were Americans, but we didn't know that at the time. We didn't go around checking nationalities.
How long were you at Dachau?
Well, I'd say that probably maybe 2-3 days, Dachau, Breslau, because we take the camp and secure it and then move on to the next objective. And now I don't even remember in what part of Europe they were. I know that I was there, and then we moved on and continued to chase the Germans till the end of the war, and I ended up on the Rhine River, or not on the Rhine, on the Danube River in Linz, Austria.
Looking back at your wartime experience, what else do you want to share with us? What else should we understand about what you went through?
That's well, I you know, it's something that we don't want to happen ever again. And one of the reasons is education of the European people about what freedom really is about and how to have an election to elect leaders that are competent and care about the country and not want to be a military threat. So it's taken years and years and years to kind of accomplish that particular thing. It's still going on. And then if you pick up the London paper, they're still squabbling over something in Parliament, or the German paper, while they're squabbling over some particular thing in whatever. Essentially, it's all political.
How did your life change after Germany surrendered in May of 1945?
Well, of course, I was a whole year in Europe after the shooting stopped, taking people back home. And so you became much better at where you were, what country you were in, what the traditions were, what the food was, and associating with those people. It may have been Czechoslovakia or Slovaks or part of Hungary or you know, maybe some of the guys were from Poland. Some of our fellows were from Polish families and could speak the language. And there was a lot of really interesting things. I can remember a particular instance. We were in a little town in Germany, and I don't remember the name of the town, but it was dark, and I know that it was probably maybe a couple hours before daylight, and we had gone into the town to reconnoiter it. And in the process of following this Jeep and leader and some of this guy was a sergeant, and he got out of the Jeep, stood on the hood, and started yelling, "Beer, beer, beer." And we're going, what in the dickens? And all of a sudden, the lights in the town came on. People were turning lights on and running out into the street. This was Sergeant Beer from that village. And that was his name, and there were a lot of people named Beer in that town, and he knew all about it. And it was just a shock to see this, you know, and this, what, are these the enemy? Well, maybe, but they were, you know, regular people like anybody else. And that was pretty funny. And after we got it all settled and quieted down and started to move on, well, then 2 or 3 of the guys, you know, knew him and said, "Don't ever do that again." But it was really funny, that particular incident.
As you were taking people back to their home countries, did they tell you in detail about what they went through during the war?
They were so happy to have food and cigarettes and that we were Americans. They asked us a lot about America. And California was the promised land. So was the United States as far as that goes. And so they wanted to hear about all that. But they didn't want to talk about their experiences or anything like that. They just were happy to be free, and they're going home. So there was very little discussion about what they went through or anything like that.
Where were you stationed after the war?
Well, after the war, I was stationed in Ried, Austria for a while, and that was like Switzerland, very nice little thing. And stationed in Linz for a while, and 2 or 3 other little places. Our unit would move maybe a town or 2 away and reestablish itself, and then move someplace else. And they're reorganizing and processing people to go home, depending on what point, how many points they had. And if you had 50 points or more, you got 3 points for each month I think you served, and then so many points for battles, and I had 54 points or something like that. So I was going home immediately. And I went in to talk to the captain about that, and he told me that I wasn't going home because I seemed to be able to communicate with people very well, so they kept me to take people back to their country. I did that for a year after everything stopped. And that was an education. Got to see an awful lot of country, meet an awful lot of people, and sample some of the food. So it was, in a way, well worth it. But I don't think I'd trade that now for anything. Because, you know, if you were wealthy, you went to university, graduated, and then they sent you to Europe. And essentially, I had that experience of going and going over Europe quite a bit, then came home and went back to high school. So I was in the 11th grade for about a half a semester, and then I was in the 12th grade and graduated. Well, I had all this background, and that all counted toward points to become eligible for college. And then I went to Pasadena Junior College.
You're running ahead of me just a little bit. We're still in Europe for a little bit longer. I have one or two more questions. You had mentioned to me before that you were in Nuremberg.
Yeah.
How did you get there, and what did you do there?
Well, essentially, we were transferred to that general area, and we ended up being assigned as reconnaissance. They assigned us to walk the perimeter around the trials at Nuremberg. So you're on the street out there walking around, and so-called guard duty. We didn't even know what we were guarding against. There wasn't anybody going to escape to anything. There wasn't anybody going to try to get into anything. So here you are walking around out there, you know, supposedly guarding. We didn't even know what we were guarding. All we knew is that this was a particular area in Nuremberg where the trials were being held. And I guess it was important, but didn't seem much to us, you know, just one of the things that you did. Could have been, you know, a beer garden, but it wasn't.
So how much did you understand about what was going on inside?
Well, we did know that there were a number of high-ranking German officers that were being held responsible for whatever happened in Europe. And so there was some kind of so-called trials going on. And we didn't know much about that. All we knew is that there was the Nuremberg trials. And they didn't educate us about any of that and sit us down and say, these are what these guys did. All they said is the trials going on. There were some atrocities and and we feel that these people were responsible. And so, okay, well, we want you to walk the perimeter outside the buildings. Okay.
How much of your experiences were you able to write about to your family?
Well, you know, they wanted to know more about, did I get the chocolate cake? Did you get the mail? Or whatever. And probably you're aware of the fact that I had written over 100 letters to my family, and we could not describe anything that happened to us as far as action. All we could describe was, yeah, we got the chocolate cake, or yeah, where everything's fine, and we're in a particular area. Sometimes we couldn't even mention the town. Just we're in some place in Luxembourg, or some place in Czechoslovakia or Slovak or wherever.
Is there anything else about your time in Europe that we haven't discussed that you want to mention before we go back to the United States?
Well, I can't really think of anything really. You know, we didn't know anything much about what the Germans did. until after we got back. And then we were aware of some of it. But at the time, we weren't particularly aware of they didn't sit us down and discuss all that. All they did is you were there to serve a particular thing, and as soon as your point number came up, you could go home.
When did you leave Europe and go back to the States?
I think I was over there 30 months. From so whatever that is, I think I came home in 1946. I think it was April the 6th or 7th, something like that. I was in Fort Bliss, Texas, and then I got to go home.
What was it like for you to be back in the USA?
Well, it's wonderful. You know, your train dropped you off at Fort Bliss, Texas, and then they processed you, gave you a new uniform, and paid you for whatever they owed you, which is like $20 or $30. And then I said, okay, we'll open the gate, you can go home. And we're standing there looking like, wait a minute, we're in Fort Bliss, Texas. I live in California. How am I supposed to get there? You know, is there a bus? Is there a train? They didn't give us any information. Just turned you out the gate and it's up to you to get home. And there was a guy there with a car, and I think it was a convertible. But at any rate, there were 4 or 5 of us from California. And he said, well, I can take you back to Los Angeles for $25, I think it was, or $20. So we all chipped in and gave him $20 apiece and got in the car. And then we just sat there, and he's looking at us. Are we leaving or what? He says, any of you guys ever driven to California? And I'm looking at, you're going to charge us $20 to go to California? You don't even know how to get there? And he said, well, if you know how, I could give you back $10. So he gave me back $10. And I said, do you know where Highway 66 is? And he said, yeah, I can find that. I said, it goes from Chicago to Santa Monica. Oh, okay. So then we got on Highway 66. And the crazy thing is, we went right by, in Monrovia, where I ended up with my folks, on Foothill Boulevard. We went right by the street that my folks lived on, Canyon, and went clear down into Los Angeles, where I told my folks to meet because I didn't know where Monrovia was or where their house was. And went by within 2 blocks of where I lived, and right down into 6th and Main in LA, where I met my parents, and then drove back to Monrovia. And it was probably 2 or 3 days later that dawned on me, we went by this country corner on the way to LA, you know. They could have stopped me off right there and I could have walked home.
How had America changed while you were in Europe?
Well, the first thing I remember is that, you know, everything was rationed. Gasoline, food, there was ration tickets, and then all of a sudden that was all cut loose. So you could buy gas, and gas was like, you know, 25 cents a gallon. And then you could go to the market and buy whatever you needed. And it was, you know, just like I remember. I mean, all of a sudden everything was back to normal, or pretty much that way. The only thing is you had lots and lots and lots of veterans wandering around, and an awful lot of them are registered to go back to school, which is one of the things I did. And I went back to Monrovia High School for a year and graduated because I was in the 11th grade. And one of the first things I did when I got back to high school was read for a play and ended up with the lead in the play. And I liked theater, and I did a lot of that. Went to Pasadena City College, did the same thing. And I used to do a stand-up comedy routine also. And so I was involved in a lot of that type of thing. And then ended up also as an electrician doing the stage and some of that things later on, because I ended up working for Pasadena Vice School District as an electrician.
You married and had a family. How much did you tell your family about your experiences during the war?
Well, my first family was my two sons, Alan and Sean. And unfortunately, Sean passed away when he was about 30 from cancer. But I didn't discuss it all. All I knew is that Dad was in World War II. And the second marriage, why, one of my grandsons started researching some of the things that about where it was, and informed his mom, Sylvia, who was my daughter, a lot about some of the stuff that I had been involved in. And then it was like opening a can of worms. It all started coming out.
How do you think your wartime experiences impacted you? Did you have nightmares or flashbacks or anything?
Well, I used to have a little bit of that. My wife would wake me occasionally and say, "You're running again," you know. So apparently I had that kind of dreams and things like that, and for a long time, and finally went away. Finally got over it, got past the thing, and found out that, you know, nobody's going to try to shoot me, I don't think. Of course, if you go back to Compton today, we won't even talk about that.
Has your view of religion changed during the course of your lifetime? Has your view of religion changed over the course of your lifetime, from childhood to now?
No, not really. I had a pretty good foundation. My grandfather being a minister, we attended church quite a bit, and I continued that type of thing. And when I married my wife, Sylvia, one day she said she was Catholic and she'd kind of like to go to church. So I said, well, we'll go down the street. We were in Yucca Valley. We went down the street about maybe 2 miles, and there was a little church there, a real pretty little church. And it was an Episcopal church or Anglican. And walked in there and picked the little books up, and it's identical to the Catholic Church without the Pope. The Anglican Church is established by, who was it? English King, Henry VIII, and Cardinal, Wolsey, was it? At any rate, the Pope wanted something other than Henry would agree to. He wanted another divorce, and the Pope said no. So he said, okay, kicked the church out and turned to the Cardinal and said, okay, now we're the Church of England. So he adopted the Bible just like it came out of the Catholic Church. And over the period of years, there's been a few modifications, like you can get divorced and a few things like that, but it's pretty close to it. So when I took Sylvia to it, she opened the book and said, "This is just like, well, this is just wonderful." And it was Anglican Church is very close to it. The only thing is we don't recognize the Pope as an omnipotent power or whatever. We know he's the Pope, and that's okay. But I don't know if I told you. Did I tell you about the Pope from New York that was almost cardinal? Yeah, there was a Cardinal Scola who was almost nominated, to become the next pontiff, and everybody was all excited because it'd be the first American. Then it just kind of faded. They said, "Why? He was perfect for the job. What happened?" I said, "Stop and think about it. He'd been known as Pope Scola."
Okay. I have one or two more questions for you. We're almost finished. How would you respond to a Holocaust denier who said it never happened?
If you weren't there, you didn't know. And all you have to do, they got all kinds of pictures of Auschwitz in the ovens and some of the other atrocities that were happening. They didn't conscript the people and put them all in Auschwitz. A lot of times they just slaughtered them, line them up on the, and then shoot them. So we knew about that. So it wasn't like it didn't happen. You had first had an experience at seeing some of that stuff. And so there's no way that you're going to convince me it didn't happen. You can fantasize that it didn't happen. If you want to believe that, that's wonderful. But it happened.
When you first learned about some of these atrocities, not just you individually, but your comrades also, your fellow soldiers, what was the reaction?
Well, most of the guys, disbelief. We couldn't believe that any human would do that to other people. Why? What'd they ever do to you? What was the reason to take a whole family and execute them? And that was just, you're dumbfounded to think that there are people in the world that would do that because of what? Their nationality, their religion, the color of their skin, what? But this has been going on for centuries. I mean, look at the Vikings. They'd invade a country and then they'd slaughter everybody in the town, And the interesting thing is that Ireland has changed a great deal because of the Vikings. The Vikings spent a great deal of time in Ireland. So if you're from an Irish extraction, you're probably part Viking, which is Norwegian or Swedish or Danish.
Is there anything we have not talked about that you want to talk about before we finish?
Yeah, one of the things that you want to remember is that people are essentially the same. I don't care what nationality they are. They have the similar traditions and beliefs. They believe in God. They'll believe in birthdays. They'll believe in celebrations. They may be partial to their country. That's wonderful. But essentially, they're all the same. It's very. I don't care where you go. you know, whatever country it is, there are a number of things that are very similar. And that goes clear back to the beginning of time. I've read an awful lot about the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayans and the cities that they built in South America and in Mexico, and the traditions that they had, very similar to today. And a lot of the things that they did, you know, it's people want to survive, they want to be happy, and they want to have a family. And so if the society is pretty well organized, those things can happen and you can be part of that group. In the United States, we're just blessed to be a nation of that kind of thing.
What would you like for somebody who watches this interview in 50 years or 100 years? What would you like them to understand about your experiences, and what is your message to them?
Well, essentially, it means that you should, you know, establish yourself in some religious belief that gives you guidance and strength. And then from that, you learn how to be tolerant and kind and help people. And that's what it's really all about, is we're all human beings, and it doesn't make any difference where you're from or what supposed nationality you're supposed to represent. You're a human being, and in a lot of ways, you're probably American, and even if you're not, you know, this is the kind of country where that's what we do. We help people and try to guide them and give them help. That's why they're swarming like millions trying to come from South America to the United States, because they realize that it's the promised land, and it really is. If you get here, you can get a job in a pretty short time and, you know, become Americanized.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
You're more than welcome.
What are we looking at here?
Well, you're looking at the 11th Armored Division's progress through Europe to the end of the war, and that is where we were, who we were, and what we did. So it's G2 Tactical Intelligence, and they documented all about the actions that we went through during that particular time.
And it has your name at the top, Private H. Robinson?
Right, yeah. But you see, because we were in the 11th Armored Division, the 11th Armored Division wanted to make sure that everybody that was in the division that survived got a copy of that. But I preserved them so that, you know, so other people would know.
So this was given to you by the Army?
This was given to me by the 11th Armored Division. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about this?
Well, G2 means the fact that that's the intelligent group of the 11th Armored Division, and they wanted to make sure that everybody knew who they were and what they did. And I have 2 or 3 different maps like that.
We'll get to them in just a minute. Thank you. What are we looking at now?
Well, this is the beginning of the 11th Armored Division report on where we were, who we were, and where we served until the end of the war. And we ended up on, like I said, the Danube River in Linz, Austria. And they just documented, the towns and the various terrain and things like this that we were involved in. So it's just part of the action that we served.
And your name, sir?
My name is Private Henry Robinson, PFC.
And this was, you said a moment ago, these were given to you by the U.S. Army.
This was, yeah. The interesting thing is that 1940, probably 1947 or 48 was about when this came out. And I don't know hardly anybody that actually preserved these. They just looked at it and probably put it aside, and that was the end of that. And that's kind of too bad, because it should be preserved and recognized as, something that happened in Europe and who was there and what they did.
Thank you. And what are we looking at now?
Well, this is the actions in print of what we did and where we did it. And I at the time that this was doing, I was PFC Henry Albert Robinson Jr., and this documents in print what's on the other side of that particular document there. So it tells all about the action and the city and all the information that had to do with that particular map that was on the other side.
And what unit, whose army were you in?
Well, this was U.S. Army, 11th Armored Division.
Under
General George Patton.
And how did you get this? Who gave
Well,
this
the
to you?
11th Armored Division wanted to preserve that, so they sent it to all the soldiers that they knew that was back. But I'll tell you an interesting thing that has to do with General George Patton. When I came home, I bought a little pickup. And my dad said, load the truck up, we're going to San Marino, which is a village next to Pasadena. And we got there, we're going to do a little remodel on this lady's house. I had one of my old armored shirts on with that triangular patch on it. And the lady came out and looked at that, and she said, you're one of George's boys. It was Mrs. Patton, and we did the remodel on her house.
And when did you do the remodel on her house?
That was probably about 1947, 48, somewhere along in there.
And when did the U.S. Army give you this?
Somewhere along about in there, maybe a little bit later.
After the war?
Yeah, after the war. Yeah, they wanted to document the 11th Armored Division. Fact is, Patton was pretty, he wanted to make sure that those people that served in the various units that he was in command of got recognized. And so he established this whole thing. It was, his doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What are these?
Well, you're talking to Private First Class Henry Robinson from the 11th Armored Division, and this is a get-home free pass that the Americans distributed by air to the Germans so they could have one of these pamphlets and walk up and surrender without getting shot. And so they scattered them all over the enemy territory, and I happened to pick a couple of them up and save them. So it's a get-home free pass.
And these are from, can you tell me what year you got this?
Yeah, they were right toward the end of the World War II. I don't even remember when the war ended. 1946, 45, something like that. At any rate, they're about 80 years old.
Thank you. This is a very big notebook. Can you tell us what this is?
This is all of the 100 letters that Private First Class Henry Robinson wrote his parents during World War II, from the time that he was inducted into the service till the time that they got out. There's over 100 letters there, and my folks preserved all of them.
Thank you. And who is this?
That is me, and during or directly after World War II, and I think I'm standing in the street near the Nuremberg trials, but I was a guard, which is very common. If you haven't got anything else to do, grab a gun and walk the post. So you were a guard there for a few hours, and they only kept us on that for like a couple hours. It wasn't day and night and all that. But Nuremberg trials were supposedly very important. But that was what I was doing at that particular time.
And your name, sir?
PFC Henry Robinson.
And that was approximately, what, 1946?
Yeah, about
47?
just directly after the shooting stopped, 1946.
Okay.
Somewhere along there. I came home about April of 46. So it was probably maybe February or March.
Thank you. And please tell us about these pictures.
There are pictures of my wife, and I don't remember exactly what year it was, but we'd only been married a short time. So I took some pictures. She was a very attractive young lady. And so I was, more than proud of her, and we took a couple of pictures.
And her full name, please?
She was Sylvia Ann. Originally, she was Sylvia Ann Arnold, and then she got divorced, and then I married her, and she became Sylvia Ann Robinson. But she was born in London, England.
And the baby?
And the baby, I think, is Randy. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's who it is.
Anything else you want to tell us about?
No, Sylvia had three. She had Randy, and then Robin and Sylvia, the twins. And at any rate, this was when she was, I don't remember exactly what year that was, but the kids were, Randy obviously is a baby, and Randy's now, 70? So it's probably 70 years ago, or 69, something like that.
Okay, thank you. And who are these people?
These are Sylvia's children, mine, and the one closest to us is Sylvia, and then Randy, and then Robin. And Robin and Sylvia were identical twins. And Randy's a little older than them by about 18 months. And
who's the blonde?
The blonde is Sylvia, and the brunette is Robin. And Randy is located in Upland, California. He runs a automotive shop. actually builds race cars. And races on engines are pretty well known among the race car unit people.
Do you know when or where this was taken?
I kind of think it was probably taken either in Palm Springs or thereabouts. You know, we used to live in Yucca Valley, and so it was probably taken in Palm Springs or that area, and maybe given to us for Christmas or something like that. Yeah.
So you don't know what year?
I do not know
okay.
What year, you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What are we looking at now?
Well, you're looking at the awards that were given to me by the ambassador to France, Congress, and the city of Las Vegas.
No, that was
city
the
of
Senate.
Nevada.
That was the Senate.
Yeah.
We have the cities also. But we didn't.
Anyhow, they're just recognition of awards for the service that I went to during World War II.
And it has your name on here?
Yeah.
Yes. Henry Robinson Jr., yes?
Yeah.
And when did you get, do you remember when you got these, or
yeah,
over different times?
Probably been about 6 months ago.
Okay.
Something like that they decided to have a ceremony and award me these certificates of thank you for the service that, you know, they should do it to everybody.
So this is from about 2023?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What are we looking at now?
Well, those are 11th Armored Division's one I served with the longest. The 4th Armored Division was the division that we supported at the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne. They were in there, and then later on I ended up in the 4th Armored Division because our unit got transferred. So I served with both of those units during World War II, and the little medal in the center was for gunnery and riflemanship and firing weapons, and I practiced on that till I became expert. I did that rather than go into town and drink beer, which I don't like.
And can you give me your full name, sir?
Yeah, this is Henry. Actually, I'm formally PFC Henry Robinson Jr.
And when did you get the medal? Was this
Well,
after
the
the
medal
war?
was probably sent to me before I went over to Europe.
Oh.
Any rate, you know, as soon as you accomplish that, then it took the military about 6 or 8 months to recognize the fact that you've accomplished a particular thing, and then they have to go through all the paperwork and the processing and the signing and the rigmarole, and they send it to you in a little box.
So that was in the 1940s, early
Yeah,
1940s.
probably 44, 45, somewhere along in there. I don't know. Maybe, you know, I went in 43, so could be 44.
Okay, thank you. What are we looking at now?
Well, you're looking at the book that was given to me by the concert people last night, which is, what was last night?
It's February 29th.
February the 29th. I was honored at the concert for my service, and the little medal there was awarded to me by the ambassador to France, and that particular medal, when you receive it, automatically elevates you to a knight. So you're now a knight, and that was a ceremony that they presented to me from the ambassador to France from the United States. And so the book recognized that, and I went to a concert last night at UNLV, and they recognized me again as the recipient of the medal. And then I had to sit there for about an hour and a half and sign books like this one from all the people that came by after the concert.
And you're mentioned by name, Henry Robbie Robinson.
Yeah, Henry, Private First Class Henry Robinson. And so they elevate you to a knight, and my feelings are that's wonderful. That and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee.
Not anymore, it won't. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us about this?
No, I think that's fine. I was dumbfounded that they had a big concert with probably 1,200 people there, and here I am on the back of the concert thing as recognition for my service. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you, and thank you very much for speaking with us today. This now concludes the interview.